Dr. Miha Šimac studied history and theology in Ljubljana, and now he works as an assistant at the chair for church history and patrology and participates in courses church history and history of the church in Slovenia. His studies focus on the research of church history, the integration of the church into the society of the Habsburg monarchy, and especially on the period of the First World War and military clergy. He will tell us about perceptions of the Congress of Ljubljana in the Habsburg Carniola. So please, Miha.
Thank you very much for this warm presentation. Dear ladies and gentlemen, 200 years ago, at the end of the Congress, the Ljubljana chronicler Henry Costa wrote, quote, "Beautiful, the most beautiful days given to Ljubljana by the affection and grace of the most popular ruler are receding. But the memory of this blessed time will live on as long as the hearts of the people from Carniola region will beat." End of quotation. To what extent have these words really come true? And how much has this historical event, which, after all, placed Ljubljana on the political map on the world for a few months, imprinted itself in the memory of people from Carniola? Has the Congress of Ljubljana, as expected by the active and passive participants, really received the proper commemoration? As we heard during the previous presentations, they initially planned to erect a monument, but the idea was not realized because they spent the funds also in accordance with the emperor's suggestion on more useful things. In people's minds, the construction of a hospital, the draining of a swamp, or the establishment of a provincial museum celebrating its high jubilee this year were primarily associated with the wisdom and kindness of Emperor Franz. But in fact, all these improvements were due to the Congress and the rulers who were staying in the city. Historian Peter Radic drew the attention to such awareness in his own way. For example, when he described the history of Ljubljana Civil Hospital. But these were individuals. In general, historiography in Carniola alone did not address this important event at all, and did not address it properly. One of the reasons might be the fact that historiography in Carniola was developing from the first half of the 19th century and up until the 1870s. And the Dimit's monumental work, which is still often quoted today, unfortunately completed in 1850. A lack of interest in the subject of the Congress of Ljubljana could also be contributed to the fact that it took place during the reign of Prince Metternich. After 1848, they saw him as their opponent in the context of the searching the national identity, which is probably why they did not want to highlight the Congress of Ljubljana, which he chaired. However, it is important to remember that it should be emphasized that these opponents and seekers of national identity, as we will see, were able to take advantage of individual small events from this very Congress to consolidate identity. In the first attempt of noting down the history of Slovenes, the student Janez Trdina wrote only a couple of short lines about the Congress. Even later, similar attempts, such as Congress, were rarely mentioned, namely in Ciperle's booklet on Carniola region, titled Kranjska dežela, and Glasser's description of the history of Slovenian literature. Moreover, the references to the events in Ljubljana in 1821 were also very rare in some school books and textbooks. Although there were many passive observers or even active participants, for example, Henrik Kostap and Professor Frank Sava Richter even wrote diaries about those events. But they did not write much about the Congress, with the exception of modest contributions, such as the publication of the list of participants in 1858, as Eva Holtz found out decades ago. A few more words about the whole Congress could therefore be found in the newspapers after 1881. Probably also because they were able to learn about the importance of the event from the published diaries of Prince Metternich and Friedrich von Gentz. Perhaps the publication of the diplomat's diary encouraged the publication of the excerpts from the Henry Costa's diary in the Leibacher Zeitungen in 1892. In the same year, historian Peter Radic also wrote about the two diplomats, pointing out that the Congress was worth a more detailed discussion. However, this never happened despite the publication of individual fragments from the diaries of the participants, such as yesterday's contribution of Janko Brle on the notes about Verchovec, the Bishop of Zagreb. In 1914, Otmar Hegemann wrote more extensively about the Congress, but this was actually everything beside Schenk's dissertation, which arose after the World War, actually in the period of the Second World War. So was the memory of the people in Carniola region really so modest, and it only included the squares or inns named after the Emperor of Russia, or did it remain alive in the heart of the people as Costa promised? Even Taucher wrote that the Congress remained, quote, in the minds of the people in Carniola, end of quotations, because of the denominations. Otherwise, it almost disappeared from their memory. At least, so it seemed at the first glance. On the basis of various materials, records in the chronicles, newspapers, and fragments examined, it can be said that ordinary people remembered the so-called most beautiful days in Ljubljana due to narratives and preserved individual fragments. One of these is certainly a restored small table from the Congress, which was presented to the general public in more details in 2009 by Riena Žmuc and her colleague, and can be now seen in the City Museum. In the year after the Congress, some individuals wanted to praise themselves with some of the items preserved from this period, which, as it seemed, preserved at least until the collapse of the monarchy. Such, for instance, in October 1918, there was an exhibition of Slovenian women's work and folk costumes, where one could see a white apron in which during the Congress of Ljubljana, under the ruling of Emperor Franz, danced a girl from Trnovo called Jurička. As early as 1884, individuals also tried to discuss in the then newspapers, where they tried to determine whether, for example, the bands originated from the time of the Congress or were even older. They often discussed about physical items. For example, in the biography of the painter Janez Potočnik, biographers specifically mentioned that during the Congress, he was supposed to accept an order for an altar painting of Alexander, the Emperor of Russia. But it's not entirely clear whether the order was carried out or not. However, if this is not the case with Potočnik, Isidor Cankar claimed that the Congress found its fleeting reflection at least in some sketches by the painter Mateusz Langos. This was one of the ways of preserving the memories of important events when the capital hosted diplomats and rulers. However, the memories of the Congress were more vivid in the stories, in the anecdotes, in the testimonies. As mentioned above, some of these testimonies have also found their place in consolidating awareness and searching national identity. This certainly includes the conversation which took place in the time of Congress between the Russian prince and the Slovenian priest, linguist, and the poet yesterday mentioned, Dr. Jakub Zupan. In this conversation, they discussed different issues related to languages and which language is closer to the Old Church Slavonic, the Russian or the Carniolan. Namely, The Russian prince claimed that the Carniolan languages was a skewed Slavic dialect, which affected Zupan. Therefore, he defended himself as follows, quote, "Allow me, dear prince, to ask a few questions instead of providing the answers. Which Slavic dialect is the purest? Is it not the old Slavonic one in Cyrillic translation of the Bible?" The Russian prince agreed that this was Old Church Slavonic, and Zupan continued that the language which was closer to the Old Church Slavonic was less skewed. The Russian agreed with him, and therefore followed by a real burst of Zupan question: how do you say certain words in Russian, in Cyrillic, in Old Slavonic, in Carniolan? For example, well, what is a cow called in Russian? Korova. How about in Old Slavonic? Krava. And in Carniolan also Krava. How do you say a head in Russian? Golova. How about in Old Slavonic? Glava. In Carniolan, it's also Glava. With a number of questions of this kind, the Russian prince, in the end, as the newspapers Novice reported as early as 1847, felt defeated. This story and Zupan's derivation from the time of the Congress of Ljubljana were later reprinted several times on various occasions. People from Carniola do not remember such professional issues and topics and details, but they remember the stories of individuals who met with the rulers and about whom they talked about for many decades. One of them was the story about the meeting between Fran Nojavet's mother and Elizabeta Bezlai and Alexander, the Emperor of Russia. He was very well known for often walking incognito through the streets and surroundings of Ljubljana. The true story of Elizabeta Bezlai is connected with washing. According to the story, a beautiful young girl, Elizabeta, was washing the laundry. After finishing, she was washing her face when the Emperor of Russia and his adjutant stopped by. End quote. When the Emperor looked at the beautiful woman, he stopped, pulled a red silk handkerchief out of his pocket and smiled when he was offering it to the beautiful girl to wipe off her face. End of quotation. Such memories were unforgettable. Moreover, there are many similar stories about the Russian ruler which do not lack almost hagiographical elements. He unexpectedly appeared here and there and helped this or that poor man and endowed him with a golden coin. Some stories were even noted down in school readers, and some of them were passed on and discussed about for a long time due to their spiciness. One of them is certainly a story about two mistresses titled Dve ljubice. As Trdina emphasized in a letter to Zbašnik, he wrote about his trip to Dolenska to meet Prešeren's Julia. But by coincidence, he also met a, quote, Slovenian female friend of Alexander I, the Emperor of Russia, end of quotation. About her, he then learned this and that and included the information in the above-mentioned work, Dve ljubice. Trdina concealed the name of the main character, but as we read in the footnotes of the work collected, it was later revealed that the girl was Katarina Kalin from Ljubljana, born in 1805. That means she was 16 years old at the time of Congress. She was famous for her beauty, probably a reason for becoming empress, so-called mistress. According to the people's rumors, she was receiving certain assets from the emperor even after the end of the Congress. The Congress, therefore, as is typically for great events, remained in the memories of the masses and individuals, mostly due to rumors and stories, which were also published in the newspapers. In 1865, a part of these stories about the Emperor of Russia was published in the Carinthian newspaper, Slovenski Glasnik. The first story is about the emperor's visit of the mill near Gradaščica, where people ate sour milk. Suddenly, the emperor and his companion appeared there, and the emperor tasted the sour milk. Before leaving, he left a golden coin under the empty bowl. People love to talk about this kind of stories even years later. One of the interesting Alexander's adventures in Carniola is recorded in the chronicle of the monastery in Škofja Loka. In 1868, a Capuchin chronicle of Škofja Loka, they wrote about the death of their brother, P. Milner, from Carinthia. He especially liked to remember one of the visitors of the monastery. During the Congress in 1821, a visitor who wanted to see the monastery knocked on their door. Brother Pius showed him the monastery and answered many questions about the monastic life. At the end of the conversation, the visitor insisted that Brother P blessed him with the blessed water. Just before the farewell, he asked P, quote, "Do you know me?" The brother thought, "You are a great man, probably a soldier." "Yes, that's me," and he left. End of quotation. And the visitor was Alexander I, the Emperor of Russia. All these stories about the Congress of Ljubljana were closely connected with the Emperor of Russia. On the other hand, there are only a few stories about the Franz, the Emperor of Austria, even though he also liked to walk around and among ordinary people. The preserved story is about the emperor's visit and satisfaction with the beautiful singing in the Ljubljana Cathedral. According to the previously mentioned notes, journal, or emperor's diary, we could put this in time because he really addressed words of praise for the singers in the choir on April 18. So we can confirm that story. To conclude, these fragments, the humble anecdotes, represent one of the most vivid memories that have reminded people of glorious moments of the Congress of Ljubljana. In this spirit, however, the people from Carniola realized Costa's words in a way. With regard to the historiography of Carniola region, we must, to be honest, agree with our predecessors who at the celebration of the centenary of the Congress in 1921 emphasized that it was not, quote, presented details and will need to be thoroughly researched, end of the quotation. Unfortunately, this has not been fully realized until the present days, with the exception of a book by Igor Gardina, a novel by Mira Mihalic, or previously mentioned Schenk's dissertation, now newly published. There has not been many progress in this respect. The presentation, however, at this symposium can fill us with the hope and faith into the future that over 100 years our descendants will present new findings of their researchers on the Congress of Ljubljana. Thank you very much.